On today's show, author Roger Persaud joins us to talk about his book, America Should Be Grateful to Haiti. Plus, the U.S. took out a terrorist mastermind, but wait until you hear how we may have done it. Also, the village of Cockington has a new mayor, and he likes his Guinness, and he's been banned from the local pub because he's a horse. All this and more on this episode of The Open Highway.
The Open Highway with Eric Erickson.
Hey everybody, and welcome to The Open Highway. I'm your host, Eric Erickson. As always, thank you so much for joining me. It is a wonderful day outside. Oh, I laugh because I'm going to be honest with you. You're honest with me, I'll be honest with you. So I did the entire show and got through the entire show, and I realized I had forgotten to plug in my microphone. Yes, I may have written literally the book on the subject of podcasting, available now from Amazon, but even I make mistakes. So it happens to the best of us. So I am re-recording the show, and actually it's a good thing because some more news came in and some other stuff is going on. So I have some different topics, but my guest is still the same. Roger Persaud is my guest today. He wrote the book, America Should Be Grateful to Haiti, which is this incredible dive into how Haiti fought the revolution against France, how this David and Goliath story, and how it led to the Louisiana Purchase, and even some of the roots of modern-day systemic racism. We get into that. Fascinating conversation. Look forward to sharing with you later in the show. But before that, it is time to dive into the news. All right, so first up, so you heard Biden has COVID again. That it doesn't really surprise anyone. It's amazing how much we've learned about COVID. Remember in the early days when we would talk about it and it was like, here might be the symptoms and this is what we think it is. And then the vaccinations came out. And at first everyone thought that if you got the vaccination, you wouldn't get COVID. Remember that? And then it became, oh, no, it's if you get the vaccination, you won't get COVID as bad. And you won't get it again. And now you get it twice. And it's just a learning curve, isn't it? We have no idea what the hell's going on. But anyway, Biden's got it again. Apparently he's got a sore throat or a cough or something again. But he is still at work. In fact, he is so at work that he took out a terrorist mastermind.
On Saturday, at my direction, the United States successfully concluded an airstrike in Kabul, Afghanistan that killed the emir of al-Qaeda, Iman alZawiri. You know, Zawiri was bin Laden's leader. He was with him the whole time. He was his number 2 man, his deputy at the time the terrorists attacked 9/11. He was deeply involved in the planning of 9/11. One of the most responsible for the attacks that murdered 2,977 people on American soil. For decades, he was the mastermind behind attacks against Americans, including the bombing of the USS Cole in 2000, which killed 17 American sailors and wounded dozens more.
But what's interesting about this is apparently they used what is called, and the State Department by no means is coming out and saying this is what happened, but experts are looking at the damage to the house. If it had been a normal missile, it would have wiped out the house. But there's very little damage to the building. And what experts are thinking is that they used what's called a R9X Hellfire, or otherwise known as a ninja or a flying Ginsu. So you remember Ginsu knives? Remember you could cut through a can? They were always on the late night infomercials, and they're like, but these are amazing. They'll cut through anything.
The Ginsu is so sharp it can cut through a tin can and still slice a tomato like this.
Apparently, what happens is this specialized missile, some call it a drone, or basically it's a missile. It is so precise that it uses razor blades to slice through the target. It doesn't explode. It slices through the target like a Ginsu knife. Get it? This thing is so precise that experts say that they can aim it at a car and it will take out the driver but leave the other occupants in the car unharmed. So this is what they think that the U.S. government used to take out alZawiri. It's odd because it's a technological marvel. The fact that they can be so precise to take out a subject that there's no collateral damage. We used to hear about how they would try and take out a subject and it would accidentally kill the kids that they were using as human shields, or the house would be taken out and other people. They can do this with such precision that there are some stories out there, and they're uncollaborated, that he was on the balcony with other members of the organization and they were untouched. Is that true? I don't know. I'm not claiming it was. I'm just seeing reports out there that say that. So that's amazing from a technological military standpoint, that now people who aren't involved, who are human shields or other people other than the target, will not be hurt. But the power that gives a military is insane. That it can be, you could take somebody out in a crowd. You could take somebody out. It's so precise. So, it's this discussion that we always have about, it's not the gun that's wrong, it's what you do with it. This is a totally relevant time to think about that, about how a weapon has been developed and the power that comes along with it. So just crazy to think about. The Ginsu Missile. It has razor blades on it. They pop out. There's images. I'll put them in the show notes. This is a crazy piece of technology, but this is apparently what was used. Yeah, there's a lot of things going on in the country right now. So you may have heard that the Pact Act passed. For those of you who don't know, this is an act, legislation that is being put through to give financial relief, medical aid to vets who suffered from burn pits. There are approximately 3.5 million vets who are suffering health issues from these burn pits. If you have listened to the show before, Matthew Ho has talked about this. This is a practice where on military bases, especially overseas, mostly overseas, to get rid of materials, they would just throw them in a pile and toss fuel or other combustible materials on them and just burn them right in the middle of the camp. Sometimes it was hazardous materials, sometimes it was other things, but there are stories about how the ash and pieces of it would fall on barracks and fall actually on people, and they would be covered in it. And now they realize that this is a major health issue, and they have been fighting for this for a long time. But it didn't go smoothly at first. At first, Republicans weren't ready to go for this. They claimed that it was an issue of accounting. They claimed that this was an issue where, well, the way that it's written, we can't guarantee that only it'll be paid once. They were actually accusing it of some things might be paid over and over, and they can't allow that. The pushback was that this is actually something that is in every bill. It's a common accounting practice. There's nothing out of the ordinary about it. They claimed that it was put in, and you know how politics get. But somebody very loud was not happy about this. You may have heard that Jon Stewart had a few choice words about this.
Ain't this a bitch? America's heroes who fought in our wars, outside sweating their asses off, with oxygen, battling all kinds of ailments, while these motherfuckers sit in the air conditioning, walled off from any of it. They don't have to hear it. They don't have to see it. They don't have to understand that these are human beings. Do you get it yet? Do we see that these aren't heroes? These are men and women, mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, that we just let stand outside in the heat when they can't breathe. I don't know if you know this. Obviously I'm not a military expert. I didn't serve in the military, but from what I understand, you're not allowed to just leave your post when the mission isn't completed. Apparently you take an oath. You swear an oath, and you can't leave. But these folks can leave because they're on Senate time. Go ahead, go home, spend time with your families, because these people can't do it anymore. So they can't leave until this gets done. Because these people will not give up, they will not give in, and they will not relent. This is an embarrassment to the Senate, to the country, to the founders, and all that they profess to hold dear. And if this is America first, then America is fucked.
Thank you.
Yeah, so John's very upset, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. I have to support him. I've always, we've had a lot of guests on this show from the military. We have talked about burn pits. We've talked about these issues, and it is wonderful that finally this is getting taken care of. It passed. That's what's important. But the circus around this entire thing is just shameful. Just shameful. You had, and on both sides. I mean, what it comes down to is there's a lot of name calling, there's a lot of dancing around, there's a lot of bravado. There was a rainstorm in Washington, D.C. during the vote, and the Republicans said they couldn't come out in the rain because they couldn't get to the vote. And the Democrats came out and they said, well, the Republicans are made of sugar. They're going to melt in the rain. They ha 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 ha. That's helpful. Then the Republicans came back and said, it's a typhoon. It was a typhoon. You expect us to go out for our safety. How dare you? Clutching my pearls at you for saying that we might get... Nah. So it went back and forth, and they hauled everybody in, and they got the vote. Now, you really got to wonder why the party of the military, the Republican Party, who always says that they are the party of the military, would push back against this. There's a lot of reasons. We know about the partisanship that's going on continually in Washington. But you've got a situation where the Democrats were behind this, and the Republicans are not about to allow that win to go to the other side. They're not about to give them this platform that they are now the party of the military. So they found a reason to stall, and man, they caught hell, like you heard from John and you heard from other people. I think they realized very quickly that it wasn't the right play. I think they realized quite quickly that they needed to get on board with this, and they did. So what you have seen is an example of not giving the other side a win at the risk of your own stance with the people. And we're going to see how this plays out. You've got the midterms coming up. We've got a lot of things that are rolling out in the next few months. But my guess is it will be forgotten because we have a very short memory when it comes to politics. So this is a situation where I think when it comes to November, I don't think you're going to see anybody lose their jobs. They'll be able to say, hey, I voted for it. It passed. Everything's wonderful. Everything's just peachy because we're made of sugar and we melt in the rain. I kid. But anyway, happy that the Pact Act passed. And I am just thrilled that finally the money for the healthcare for these vets will be getting out there. And we're happy about that. So let's lighten things up a little bit. So you ever heard of the little village called Cockington? And I will say that again because it's just fun to say. You ever heard of the little village called Cockington? So anyway, this is a village in the UK, and they have a new mayor. His name is Patrick. Patrick the horse. So Patrick the horse is a pet therapy horse who used to hang out at the local pub, and everyone would come in and pet Patrick, and it was an opportunity to, it's a pet therapy horse. You feel a little better when you pet him, right? So he would hang out at this pub. It was called the Drum Inn, and everybody in town loved him. He loved his Guinness. So Patrick would have some Guinness, and people would drop in. Well, they loved him so much that they voted him in as the honorary mayor. And he's even got a little cape, and he got you know how the mayors in the UK, they have those neck chains and the whole thing. They gave everything to Patrick. But apparently some people were not happy with this, so they banned him from the pub. They said, no more Guinness for Patrick. No more. He's a pet therapy horse. I mean, recently I had Larry on the show, who wrote the book A Tale of Love, about his dog Scrappy, who was a pet therapy dog, and we talked about some of the things they go through. I mean, gosh, if Patrick has had a long day helping people, let him have the damn Guinness. Don't you think he deserves it after what maybe he's been through? But they said, no, it's a zoning issue. He can't be indoors anymore. He needs to go outside. He needs to be in a garden. So I don't know where this is coming from. If anyone in Cockington is listening to the show, I would love to have you reach out, because I would like to know the real story about why poor Patrick isn't allowed to drink his Guinness in the pub. Okay? These are some of those things that, let him have the beer. Let him have the Guinness. He's a pet therapy animal. But I will stay on this, and I want to make sure that you find out what happened to our new friend, Patrick the Pony. He's a miniature Shetland, by the way. So even more so, we're not talking about a big, Clydesdale. We're talking about a little miniature Shetland pony. He's like the size of a big dog, right? So how many Guinnesses could he drink anyway? So anyway, the village of Cockington, the council that voted this out, you're on our list. So anybody from out there, reach out to us. I want to hear the real story. And that's it for the news for today.
Support comes from the History's Train Wrecks podcast that focuses on stories like a temper tantrum that changed history, the president who promised not to run again and regretted it for the rest of his life, the World War II general who lost his pants on a secret mission in enemy territory. The History's Train Wrecks podcast, available now.
So my guest today is author Roger Persaud. He is the writer of the book America Should Be Grateful to Haiti. It's a great read about the forces of Haiti who went up against the French Empire and how they defeated them in this David versus Goliath story. And it's this wonderful explanation of how that led to the Louisiana Purchase, how France needed to sell us the land in order for them to continue just existing, the debts that have been run up. And Roger and I get into a really interesting discussion about race, systemic racism. I'll even admit I ask a few silly questions because, hey, that's why I'm here, right? I ask the questions so you can have the answers. So, hope you enjoyed the interview. Here he is, Roger Persaud. So the question, though, right, the first question that comes to my mind, how do you go from being in the military, flying commercially, to writing a book about Haiti? Like that's not one of those jumps that most people kind of like make, right? Walk me through that.
Okay. The story about Haiti I learned as a 14-year-old in 1970 before I migrated. I grew up in Georgetown, Guyana. I migrated, came to New York in 1976. Now, you got to imagine Guyana got independence from Britain in 1966. In 1970, I'm reading about a country that defeated the local French, the reinforcements that were sent in, the British, then the French led by Napoleon in a 12-year battle for their freedom. And I'm like, what? You gotta be kidding. And then I come to this country and years later, I learned, wait a minute, there's something called the Louisiana Purchase. And I'm looking at this and, the area that this 100 was all owned by France. Mm-hmm. The French were hoping to have a Western empire. Haiti was the pearl of the Antilles. It was the most valuable colony anywhere. And they were going to use that to finance their Western empire. But after they lost all of that, they had to sell it. And that created Louisiana Purchase. And history doesn't connect those. See, here's the connection. Here's the question. Here's my answer to the question you're asking.
Okay.
In aircraft engineering, Now, I am more of an engineer than I am, because engineering is more into the aircraft and its workings, right? But I can fly too, that's fine. But when we have a problem that's chronic, we can't just fix it. If it's just a normal problem, we fix it, no problem. If it keeps recurring, we have to find the root cause. We have to do a root cause analysis and show the FAA how we're going to handle this chronic problem. You can't operate. So I applied root cause analysis to historic events.
Okay.
And that's why I came up, because without the Haitian Revolution,
the part of the reason that I wanted to bring you on, one, I'm a history buff and I love all of this, and any untold story is big. But so it's interesting to me because I grew up in Northwest. So I grew up, we were raised as like, we're here because Lewis and Clark came out, and, the Oregon Trail, and that. So all we heard was about, when it came to Louisiana Purchase, it was like, you have this world that you live in because of this, because then Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark out. And then I interviewed, one of my very first shows, I interviewed Leilani Upham from the Blackfeet in Montana.
Right.
And we had this amazing conversation about like, she's like, yeah, Lewis and Clark, not our heroes. And I'm like, yeah, but I grew up, and it's like, you're celebrating them. So that was a moment where I just kind of went like, all right, I have a skewed vision.
Do you know the story of the Osage?
Not enough to say that I can.
The Osages were the most powerful tribe in the center of the United States. The Osages were people of the middle waters. They owned humongous amounts of land. They had been trading with the French for years before the Americans got there, and they were rich. They were well off. Lewis and Clark they helped Lewis and Clark find the Oregon Trail. They helped them a lot, and they options with black people. Lewis and Clark had a black slave by the name of York, right? He was owned by anyhow. So there was a lot of communication, but Lewis and Clark were so impressed with the Osages, they told Thomas Jefferson to invite him to the White House, and they invited him to the White House not once but twice. And the story gets sweeter. It's the last story in my book.
You're so passionate about this. You're so like, this is why I wish I did videos.
Eric, I went there in the 70s, and I used to read cowboy novels, because growing up in Guyana, we had no TV. I used to read cowboy novels written by a guy named Louis Lamour, and he would explain the area. So I went looking for these areas, and I met these Indians, and I was hanging out with these people, and I goes, those people? Yeah, well, they killed my grandfather and my grandmother, and those people over there, they killed those people's uncle. And I'm like, what? And the Osage Reign of Terror, it's an amazing story. But anyhow.
Just here, I'll throw out because I live in LA, I always have stories like this. And the reason I know this is because I worked for his widow when I was out of college. Louis L'Amour's old house is about a half a mile down the street from where I live. I drive by it every day on the way to teaching. Yeah. It's
wow.
I worked for his widow for about a month when she got left very financially not well off when he died because of the publishing rights. And I worked for her for about a month. So his house is right down the street. I drive by it all the time.
You gotta be kidding.
Small world.
Yeah, small world.
So let's talk about the book. About the book. So it's got a very specific title.
Right.
Every word that is in that title is there for a reason. So can you share that title? It's very powerful.
America should be grateful to Haiti.
And a lot of people are like, why?
Why should the most powerful nation in the world, the largest economy in the world, be grateful to the most impoverished nation in the Western Hemisphere? Because if it was not for the Haitian Revolution, there would be no Louisiana Purchase. By 1750, Haiti was the Pearl of the Antilles, supplying cotton, coffee, sugar, and indigo, and responsible for 50% of French GDP. This was also the age of revolution. You had the American Revolution in 1776, the French Revolution in 1789. By 1791, the Haitians start sowing seeds of rebellion, and it started to pick up. It gained momentum. And in 1791, at they started, Bakaima is where they started, led by a Jamaican, a guy who was not a Jamaican, he was African slave, but he was shipped from Jamaica because he was caught teaching people how to read. He was a Muslim cleric, and they called him Dirty Bookman because he was a bookman. But anyhow, so the Haitians not only French that enslaved them and the reinforcement that came in, but then because there was confusion in France between the monarchy and those who wanted a republic, they didn't go to France for support. They went to Jamaica, to the British. Now the British just lost America. So the British now not only eyeing Haiti, were also eyeing Martinique and Guadeloupe, which were also French territory. French were the arch enemy. The British came in with 55,000 troops, spent 10 million pounds, 3.5 years, and left in defeat. Now, Toussaint Louverture, who emerged as leader in Haiti, realized, and he had his people in Europe telling him what was going on, and he realized Napoleon had taken over. The king had been assassinated, and Napoleon was in charge. Now, France had actually abolished slavery in 1794. Napoleon said, "The hell with that. We're going back to Haiti. Slavery's back in." They started in Guadeloupe and Martinique, and they were coming into Haiti, and they came into Haiti with 88,000 troops, 408 ships over a 3-year period, led by Napoleon's brother-in-law, and they lost. Now, they had just been fighting in Africa, and they had all this territory. The United States only existed on the East Coast and the West Coast. The entire center of the United States, from the Gulf of Mexico all the way and up into Canada, was French territory. This was the French's dream of a Western empire. Now, after they lost all that blood and treasure, and they also lost Haiti, which was their cash cow, they had no choice but to sell that land in the center of the United States, creating the Louisiana Purchase, 828,000 square miles, the entire states of Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Kansas, South Dakota, North Dakota, parts of Montana, Wyoming, New Mexico, Minnesota, Texas, and of course, Louisiana. 828,000 square miles.
Why did they lose? What was it,
the reason they lost is these guys had been fighting wars all over the world.
Yeah.
And they had zero respect for this Black army in Haiti. The originals looked at it that way. Now, in the beginning, the Haitians got lucky because of the battles because the French were about to overrun the rebellion. And then the British started attacking. This was early in the revolution. So they had to leave the revolt and go deal with the British. This gave the revolt time to retool, regroup, figure out what's going on, and then emerge. The leader after that is Toussaint Louverture. He would emerge after that, and he knew what he was doing. He was a brilliant man, very, very brilliant man. This is the first successful slave revolt since Spartacus, 1900 years prior. And you know how many movies have been made about Spartacus? And all he did was beat the Romans. These guys beat 3 European powers. We need to make a movie about this. This is the real Black Panther, real life, man.
Did that spur on other revolutions?
Absolutely. He inspired Nat Turner. He inspired revolutions in America, in other parts of South America. He also supported revolutionaries in South America, like Simón Bolívar.
Mm-hmm.
He supported, a lot of them had sanctuary in Haiti, and he supported them financially. These guys were quite the revolutionaries. And in the beginning, when they started the revolt against the Europeans, Thomas Jefferson was in favor. But then he realized, that's not a good perspective as a slaveholding nation. Because if these guys could defeat their captors, we were in for trouble. And by the way, after the British suffered their defeat, because you got to understand, 200,000 Africans lost their lives in this fight. These guys were charging into cannons. They didn't care. These guys were diving off of ships when they were coming in during the Middle Passage. This was nothing new to them. Sacrificing the life of a few dozen for the millions behind you was something of honor. so they were charging into cannons with nothing.
Because they're fighting for something they believe in that's theirs, not someone else's ideal.
The British were the first to learn that.
Yeah.
One British general went back and he said, hey, you ain't beating those guys. Those guys are fighting for freedom. You've never seen motivation like that.
Yeah.
You got a line of guys coming with you, and the guy 10th in the row, he doesn't even have shoes. But by the time he gets to you, he's got shoes and clothes and a rifle. And he's walking over the dead bodies that you've already killed. And you can't even stand the stench of that. So, it was a brutal battle. It was a brutal battle. Now, a lot of European lives were lost. But by the way, this is the sweetest part of the story. And it's what makes the story. It's what makes Haiti the most impoverished country in the Western Hemisphere. Now, they fought a 12-year battle for their freedom. Independence was in 1804. Toussaint Louverture gave himself up and went back to France and died in prison. Dessalines was the leader of Haiti, and he declared independence in 1804. 21 years later, with the blessings of the powers that be, French came back, surrounded Haiti with gunboats, and demanded reparations be paid for the 200,000 lives that were lost because they were considered property. And Haiti took about 3 or 4 years before they started, but they continued to pay that debt. It's very interesting about that debt. That debt continued to be paid until 1947 to the tune of $21 billion in today's money. Oh, and by the way, Haiti became a blacklisted country. Nobody would do any business with Haiti. No countries would go in to do business in Haiti. A few German businessmen went in and set up business in Haiti. Some of them are still there. When World War I started, the United States says, oh, we can't trust those Germans in Haiti. So the American army invaded Haiti. They made some sort of a new deal over that debt with the French. And the debt that Haiti owed the French started being paid to the American government. The American government controlled the Haitian economy for 19 years. Citibank was there, and Citibank was taking out gold. And how'd you like for me to come? Oh, you're in California where there's gold. I'll come into a gold claim that you own, and I'll take out the gold, and I'll turn around to Eric, and I'll say, this is what your gold is valued at. Regardless of whatever the world market says, I'm telling you what it's valued at.
But wait, America is the great city on a hill. We would never do any. I can't even finish that sentence with like a straight face. What? So the two. I want to. This is fascinating. So the 200,000 lives.
Yes.
Those are the lives, and they said they own. Those are the slaves.
Yes.
And then because they said that was property, and the world. Yes. What did the? So this was in what 1810, 18?
No. This was 1804, 1825. 1825 was when they surrounded it. This was called gunboat diplomacy. They surrounded the island with gunboats and said, "Hey, pay up."
What did the world do? What did the world like? I know at that time we weren't.
The world said Haiti became a pariah
because the French were more powerful.
Slavery was the British had not abolished slavery. The Americans had not abolished. This was 10 years before the British. The British was 1834. The Americans was 1865. Oh, by the way, did you know the British paid compensation to the slave owners? The Slave Compensation Act of 1837, the British signed their deal in 1833, and they paid 20 million pounds to the owners of slaves for abolishing slavery. They never paid the slaves, but they compensated the owners.
That I'd heard. That one I had heard that one.
So
you shocked me with a lot of things, but that one.
Okay, you knew that one. All right.
That one I knew. Like I had heard that one, but
yeah,
I that just makes so much sense because that sets up Haiti. I mean, you're creating the history. You're creating the situation that creates. Absolutely. So today they're still paying the price for.
Absolutely, and they after the United States were involved, the United States hooked up with these dictators, the Defaulies and all these people who would do their bidding, because you had the Cold War and all this nonsense, and you had Cuba and all that, so you needed bulwarks against that. So the Defaulies, they were a bulwark for America against all the communists. but all they were thieves. They were just crooks.
Mhm.
They just stole. Oh, and by the way, most of the money that they stole are in European banks. It didn't disappear. They're in European banks. And the European banks know the origin of that money. They got excellent records.
Oh God, yes. I'm sure a bunch of it's in Switzerland and a bunch of it's,
A lot of it.
Is this all in the book? Is this all in the book?
A lot of this is in the book.
A
Yes.
lot of this is in the book.
Yeah.
The sequel is going to be, once they come out with the movie, you write the novelization. So what's the response been to the book? How's that gone?
It's gone fairly well.
Yeah.
I got on national TV 4 times. I actually got on the Chavis Chronicles with Dr. Ben Chavis. That was on PBS. I was on. It was a half-hour interview. That was very good, and that started getting me invitations to speak. So I had to kind of back off and look at the speaking business because I didn't know anything about that. And I talked to some people, and they kind of explained to me where I lay, and I said, yeah, I'd like to join in the fight against putting racism to bed. I mean, it won't happen in my lifetime, but if I can knock a few bricks down, I've done my part.
Yeah.
And I love doing that. And I spent 35 years in corporate America. I understand how it is in there. I can help them. I understand their pain, and the pain is increasing now because there's a lot. Ethnic tensions are heightened.
Yeah.
Racism and ethnic tensions are heightened.
Yeah.
By the way, are you from Sweden?
Norway.
Norway. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I've spent a lot of time in Sweden because I'm an old ping pong player.
Okay.
Yeah, and Sweden is big in ping pong.
Now I know. I'm learning so much today. I don't know about you being a public speaker, though. You're so soft-spoken, and you don't throw your knowledge out there very easily. So I don't know. You might have to get a little more excited about everything if you're going to continue doing that. What do you say then? Every once in a while, you hear people say something about you know what? Let's just draw a line in the sand and just move forward. The past doesn't matter. The past is the past. We can't heal if we keep dredging up the past. I don't think you'd agree with that.
Not really, but see, we're not dredging up the past. We're trying to make things right. Here's the situation. Some history has either been denied, distorted, or omitted. Now, I want to use that history to show, because if all you think of Black people is what you learned from 1619, then you don't deserve to respect them. You've heard about, you don't have to be a Christian to know that Caesar Augustus and the Roman Empire, they ruled that whole area, Egypt and the Middle East, all that time, during the birth of Jesus and all that time. But you don't know that when they tried to go further into Africa, they ran up against a Kushite army led by a one-armed Black woman named Amini Reynas. And she whooped them for 4.5 years till Caesar Augustus said, truce, stop. You never hear. There's a Catalan map from 1311. A Catalan map. Now, this is some part of Spain, Europe area there. And that's what they taught the world, a Catalan Atlas, they call it. And it's the area, the world as they knew it at that time. And there's only one individual on that map, and that is Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa was the emperor, the second emperor of Mali. And he is taught to have been the richest man in the world. They think he might have been 4 times richer than Bezos. And he's not even the real money guy. He got his money from his brother Abu Bakari II. He's the real emperor to develop the Mali gold business. And then he took off and took some sailing. And we believe that's where he started. That's the Baha'i settlement in Brazil. And
that's all. But that's all part of history. The victor writes the history, right?
Exactly.
I mean, trying to, for lack of a better term, whitewash the past out. I mean,
well, you see, you can be a little bit more effective because here's what had to happen. First, you had to write about the indigenous, because when Columbus and his fellows got there, when the conquistadors got there, they tried to get the Indians to work for them. And it didn't work out too well. So they got a little brutal, and they had to really dehumanize them.
Yeah.
So then they did that. Now then, Columbus grew up, he cut his teeth in Portugal. And the Portuguese slavery actually started in Brazil. The Portuguese took Africans to Brazil first. And Columbus saw that. And he said, okay, these Indians won't work. Let's see if we can get some Africans into this area. And that's what actually started the whole Hispaniola Haiti thing. They brought Africans in there. And that machine of 50% of French GDP by 1750 was fueled by 500,000 Africans working under some of the most brutal conditions known to man.
There's such a download of information here. So if you forgive me for the wheels are turning as I talk, but you also mention the Black Wall Street.
Yes.
Catastrophe, and that's another case of something that happened in American history that basically white America didn't know about until Watchmen came out, the TV series a couple of years ago, where they represented it. Like we had heard about it, but I mean, that's another case of we don't want to have it. We don't want to acknowledge that there were planes firebombing, this.
Here's how I experienced it. I was still in the Air Force. And in the Air Force, we had a good time. I had a good time in the Air Force, man. I was a C-130 jock. I had a great time. No complaints. 7.5 years. But when you got a lot of the bases are in the South. Yeah. So when you're getting to these areas, you got to find out from guys that are there before you, hey, where's it cool to hang out? Now, one of my first bases was Little Rock. And we were scared of Little Rock because we heard of Little Rock Central. Little Rock was cool, man. And we could hang out in Little Rock. We could drive to Memphis. Memphis is cool. We drove to Dallas. Dallas was popping. We went to Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City was great. And then we went to Tulsa. I was like, what happened here? And you could see something happen. The whole Black community in Tulsa was different from everywhere else we had ever been. And it took us a few days, and then people started telling us. And then one guy took us to meet some survivors. This was in the 70s. And we were meeting some of these survivors. Some of these people were in their, some of them were in their 50s, 60s. There's some that are still alive in their 90s and close to 100 now. But we met some of them when they were younger. They could really tell us what happened. And these people were educated. They weren't stupid. If you see the areas they lived in, if you see Gilcrease Hills, it's beautiful. These people were living in that area before it was a state. A lot of these Blacks that were there, they were doing business with the outlaws, the Indians, the Underground Railroad. They built up commerce. So by the time Oklahoma became a state, they were an entity. So when the dirt farmers came in from north and the cattle farmers came in from Texas, they had to shop from these guys. So these guys got rich and they prospered, right? And then two guys, a lawyer and a businessman, got together and they developed Black Wall Street. There were 300 businesses in Black. And by the way, it is Booker T. Washington that coined the Black Wall Street. And he wanted to replicate it all over the country because he thought it was a great idea. It was 300 Black businesses there. They had hotels, they had lawyers' offices, hospitals, everything they had there. Now, what was happening at the same time? The discovery of oil about the same time. And here you had some Black people with capital, and they were getting ready to invest in oil. And the city fathers in Tulsa said, we can't have that. And they brought in the Klan. And they set some things up. And a week before the race riot, there was one lynching. And then the race riot was caused by a situation where a young fellow might have been lynched. That's what caused the race riot. But that's a tremendous story. And yes, they were fired, and that's another thing. You can't do that. What I know about airplanes, these guys are flying World War I type planes. Oklahoma is an old aviation state. I flew from Wiley Post Airport and all these places, tiny little airports all over the place. Very interesting stuff. But in order to know how to drop a Molotov cocktail on a property and burn it, you have to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
You have to understand. You know what I'm saying? You've got to. There's some training and stuff that's got to go in before you can do that.
Yeah.
And they wiped that whole area out. 35 blocks wiped out.
If you've ever, have you seen the scene, the recreation?
Oh, yes.
It's just visceral the way that they did it.
Yeah.
And I know it's
I don't know how much of a big music fan you are. Have you ever heard of the Gap Band?
Yeah.
From the 80s? You know what Gap means? Gap is a block markation. Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. And in the middle of Greenwood, Archer, and Pine is the Black Wall Street.
And that's where
that's the name. That's where the name comes from, the Gap.
they had the song Drop the Bomb on Me too, didn't they? I don't know, but that gives that a whole new meaning.
Yeah.
So you made a comment earlier about in your lifetime, you don't think that you'll see racism solved. I mean, that's a given. I don't know if it'd ever be solved.
Yeah.
But do you see advancements?
Oh, I do. I see tremendous advancements even in my lifetime. Tremendous advancements. Okay.
Do you have kids?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
so as you see the
great.
Advancements, how does it affect your children? Like, do you see
they're fantastic. They're great.
Better life, better to the,
Oh, yes. All professionals.
Well, I mean, like, because there's the whole idea, like, and I'm white. I'm white. I'm Norwegian. I don't get any more white. You know, I'm a fish basically. So, but I've heard, and you hear the stories, and it's become, especially with BLM and some of the stuff, these conversations happened about the conversation. Like, and that's something I never knew. I never thought about. Like, I'd heard about it, but it's like Black parents are like, no, there's a day you have the conversation with your kids.
It's not a day. It's a constant. Reminding.
Yeah.
Hey, but incident comes up and you're like, hey, you got to realize how you handle that.
Yeah. It's
not what happens to you. It's how you react to what happens to you.
Do you see that changing? You look so sad right now.
Slower.
I wish people could see it.
I lived in a neighborhood in New York City for a long time. I'm not there anymore. It was a good neighborhood, really nice neighborhood.
Yeah.
And we had some young cops come in the neighborhood. And there was a lady that was older, and some people came in to help her. And these were some younger people, and they had some issues. And the cops came in a couple of times to visit them. And they were getting like, oh yeah, we were in this area here. And an older cop came out and said, hey, wait a minute, I've been in this area for 30 years. This is a good area. Don't start no nonsense. Now, these people that come in here, they're not from here. They're causing some problems. We're going to find out what's going on. So, you gotta know where you are. Mm-hmm. Police work is like fixing a car. You don't go from fixing a Ford to fix a 67 Mustang to fixing, a 2022 Mercedes. You know what I mean? You got to understand what you're doing. And if that police is young, just out of the academy, thrown into a neighborhood that they don't understand, it's difficult. Unconscious bias is normal. I have unconscious bias, but with training, it can be eradicated. Mm-hmm. But unconscious bias is what it is. Now, if you're a racist and you're a racist, well, you know what I mean. You need another kind of help. But unconscious bias is what we can work on.
Yeah,
we can work on that. We can work with people that are willing to work.
Is there, in your opinion, is there then a spectrum? Like, does unconscious bias start at the end of the spectrum and it goes and it gets worse and it gets worse, and then there's a point where it becomes racism? And then is there worse racism, or is it just like once you get to that point, it doesn't go any further? You know what I'm saying?
Here's an explanation I got about 30 years ago.
Okay.
Here's an explanation. You and I got daughters that are in a foot race. They're in a 100-meter dash. 15-year-old girls in a 100-meter dash. I want my daughter to win. You want your daughter to win. That's prejudice. Nothing wrong with that, okay?
Okay.
Here's where it gets a problem. I trip your daughter. That's foul, right? That's not acceptable. That's where it is. Once you start interfering, once you come in and you start to interfere in the situation, especially physically, then that's a danger point.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't deal with that. We can't tolerate that. We can't deal with that. That's got to be no tolerance, zero tolerance, especially in the workplace.
So is tripping, to use your example then,
That's
tripping
going
her
from
as
prejudice to racism.
So then the argument would be that tripping her is as bad as if you walked up and pushed her out of the way, or if you hit her.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's all interference.
Any way you impede her.
Okay.
Any way you impede her progress.
Then we're just describing it. It's like once you're in the red zone, you're in the red zone. Doesn't matter.
Exactly.
And then we're just describing what it is. So see, that was an interesting little conversation there. I feel like I learned something. That's why I do the show. I could be the stupid person and ask the stupid questions, and then
the only stupid question is
the
only stupid question is the one you didn't ask.
Well, I appreciate that. So what's next after this book? What's the next project?
Well, the next project is to go a little further, and I'm looking at Imhotep, who was the real father of medicine. You see, there's a book by a guy named Dr. James called Stolen Legacy. And it's about the raiding of the library in Alexandria.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to get a little more research into that. And I think what I get out of that is the book is going to come out of that. And also looking at a document called the Anacalypsis, written by a guy named Sir Godfrey Higgins in 1838. And the Anacalypsis is it's a linguistic work, but it has a lot of medical stuff in it. Medical stuff that Dr. Higgins found in ancient Africa. So I'm doing my research in that to come out.
You don't go light. You don't, you're a former pilot. Okay? You really like paper airplanes, and you're all in. You are all in.
It's sort of what people want to know.
So I mentioned your military service a couple times. I mentioned a couple times. What was your service exactly? What was it that you did?
I was a crew chief and flight engineer on C-130s.
In the Air Force?
C-130 aircraft. Yes, in the U.S. Air Force. Yeah.
In the Air Force, and that was because you're young. That was in like the early 2000s,
I'm young.
Right?
Thank you very much. That was that was from 76 to 83.
And then you said you became a commercial pilot, but you also flew. You were telling me you flew servicemen.
Well, at the end of my career, I took a job with North American Airlines, and I was their trainer. They flew troops from Atlanta and Dallas to either Kuwait or Bahrain or Kyrgyzstan, some of these areas. This is when we were still in the Middle East.
Mm.
This was up to 2012. From about 2008 to 2012, I worked for them. And that was great. That was a great job.
What a career.
Good job. Yeah,
well, I appreciate you having this conversation. The link to the book is in the show notes. All the information. Okay. I urge everyone to go check it out. Thank you so much for this. It's been really enlightening for me. And thanks for answering my questions that aren't stupid, but I gotta get them out there. So
thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Hello and welcome to the Winging It Travel Podcast. This is a travel podcast where we're having conversations with new guests every Monday. This is an anecdotal, informative podcast for backpackers, travellers or anyone who's interested in travel. It's a casual style where there'll be stories to tell, tips to share and experiences to inspire. My name is James Hammond. I've travelled to 50 countries, done 3 work visas and planning to do a big worldwide trip later this year. I've met so many people on my travels in the last 10 years that I just have to get them on this podcast to get their stories on record and provide some tips for you for your trip. There'll be so much travel content coming your way in the next coming weeks, months and years that'll inspire you to book that trip that you've always wanted. Stay tuned for my weekly episode. Thanks.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. If you want to help out the show, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. And if you want to head on over to the Substack, there you can read more about some of the topics I talk about, as well as other topics that interest me. Some of recent articles include, is the Elvis Empire shaken with some of the financial issues they've had? And is Joe Biden really too old to run for president? Or is it ageism? Links are in the show notes. Check out my books. And more than anything, thank you for listening. And I'll see you on the open highway.
For the highways of America, which for so many years were an assortment of as many designs and pavements as there were states, are now becoming one big road that can take you anywhere faster, safer, and more directly than ever before. What is this big road? Where is it going? How much has been built? How much is yet to come? These are questions we ask. Certainly traveling the entire system would be a memorable experience, but few of us have the time for such a trip.